800 passengers, 500 tons of speeding steel, and a microscopic fracture in the rail that not even the world's most advanced sensors could detect. The Trans-Siberian Express was 60 seconds away from becoming a mountain of twisted metal until a retired search and rescue dog felt a vibration that shouldn't exist. This is the story of Cooper, the only passenger who knew they were all about to die. Title: The Silent Alarm: How a Golden Retriever Stopped a High-Speed Disaster. Chapter 1: The Ghost in the Steel. The Trans-Siberian Express was more than just a train. It was a 500-ton miracle of chrome and carbon fiber, a silver needle stitching together the frozen hem of the world. On this night, it roared through the Siberian heartland at 200 miles per hour, a pressurized sanctuary of warmth against a blizzard that was currently erasing the horizon. Inside the luxury cabins, 800 souls slept in velvet peace, lulled by the rhythmic, hypnotic hum of a machine that promised absolute safety. Up in the command pod, the air was clinical and quiet, smelling of ozone and expensive coffee. The lead engineer, Ivan, sat behind a wall of liquid crystal displays that monitored every bolt, every liter of fuel, and every inch of the path ahead. To Ivan, the world was a series of green lines and steady pulses. The radar pierced through the whiteout, reporting a clear track, while the GPS confirmed they were exactly on schedule to the millisecond. But the machines were lying. Deep within the sub-zero marrow of the Earth, nature had been working in secret. A deep frost fracture had formed, a jagged, microscopic split in the high-carbon steel rail, caused by the violent expansion of trapped moisture. It was a silent, invisible flaw that sat directly in the path of the speeding express. It was not an obstacle the radar could see, but a trap waiting to be sprung. As the train thundered closer, the stress on the rails began to reach a breaking point. The massive weight of the engine was creating a bow wave of pressure that traveled through the steel faster than the train itself. To a human, the tracks looked solid under the swirling snow. But beneath that white blanket, the metal was moaning, ready to shatter into 1,000 lethal shards the moment the first wheel touched the fracture. The catastrophe was already written in the laws of physics. In less than 3 minutes, the 500-ton bullet would hit the brake, the lead bogie would jump the line, and 800 people would be launched into a mountain of twisted, burning metal. The engineers were smiling at their green screens, completely unaware that they were driving a funeral pyre through the dark. Chapter 2: The Sensor of Bone and Fur. While the humans trusted their glowing glass and silicon, a different kind of sensor was awake in the darkness of the baggage car. Cooper, a retired search and rescue golden retriever with a coat the color of a dying fire, was not asleep. He lay on a thick wool blanket, his head resting on his paws, but his body was vibrating in perfect harmony with the train. Cooper's world was not defined by sight or sound, but by the complex language of frequency and kinetic energy. He had spent a decade pulling survivors from the rubble of earthquakes, where he learned to distinguish the sound of shifting concrete from the sound of a collapsing roof. His paws were sensitive enough to feel a heartbeat through 3 feet of debris. Now, those same paws were flat against the vibrating floor of the express, and they were telling him a story that made the hair on his neck stand like wire. The steady, melodic thrum-thrum of the tracks had suddenly developed a jagged edge. Cooper's ears pitched forward, twitching with a precision that no microphone could match. He heard a high-pitched, metallic singing, the sound of steel under extreme tension, crying out before it snaps. To a human, it would have been buried under the roar of the wind, but to Cooper, it was as loud as a thunderclap in an empty room. He stood up, his claws clicking nervously on the metal floorboards. He paced the small confines of his travel kennel, his nose twitching as he caught the faint, sharp scent of ozone and grinding metal being carried through the ventilation system. His instincts, honed by generations of ancestors who guarded the flock against the unseen wolves of the night, were screaming at him. The rhythm of safety had been replaced by the rhythm of a wreck. Cooper let out a low, guttural whine that turned into a sharp, urgent bark. He threw his weight against the door of his kennel, his golden eyes wide with a terrifying clarity. He wasn't just a dog in a cage anymore, he was a living early warning system that had detected a flaw in the master plan of modern engineering. The ghost in the steel had been found, but Cooper was trapped behind 3 inches of reinforced mesh. Chapter 3: The Cargo Breakout. Time was no longer measured in minutes, but in heartbeats. Cooper knew he couldn't wait for a human to check on him. He began to work the latch of his kennel with a frantic, desperate intelligence. He didn't just bite at the wire, he used his powerful jaws to grip the sliding bolt, twisting his head with enough force to bruise his own muzzle. With a final, metallic clack, the door swung open, and the golden retriever vanished into the shadows of the baggage car. The interior of the train was a labyrinth of shifting weights and narrow passages. To reach the engine, Cooper had to navigate the bridge between the cars, a terrifying gap where the wind chill dropped to 40 below and the ground was a blurring streak of ice and steel. He leapt across the coupling, his paws sliding on the frost-covered metal. One slip, one moment of hesitation, and he would be swallowed by the hungry wheels below, but he didn't even look down. Inside the passenger cars, the air was thick with the scent of sleep and lavender. Cooper ran down the narrow aisles, a golden blur passing by the closed cabin doors. A porter saw him and shouted, trying to grab his collar, but Cooper ducked between the man's legs with the agility of a mountain cat. He wasn't running away, he was running toward the danger, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. As he reached the final door, the heavy, pressurized seal that led to the engine room, he found it locked. He scratched at the steel, leaving deep grooves in the paint, his barks turning into a frantic, high-pitched scream. He could feel the vibration of the fracture getting closer, the singing of the rail had turned into a violent, rhythmic hammering that vibrated through his very skull. The train was accelerating, gaining momentum for the final climb. In a moment of pure desperation, Cooper threw his entire 70-pound body against the door's emergency release lever. He didn't understand the mechanics, but he understood the feel of the machine. He bit down on the cold metal handle and pulled with every ounce of muscle in his hind legs. The seal hissed, the pressure equalized with a pop, and the door swung inward. Cooper tumbled into the cockpit, a creature of fur and fury entering a world of glass and light. Chapter 4: The Engine Room Standoff. The cockpit erupted into chaos. Ivan, the lead engineer, nearly fell from his seat as the golden retriever burst into the room, snarling and barking at the windshield. "What is this? How did a dog get in here?" Ivan's co-pilot, a younger man named Sergei, reached for a fire extinguisher to ward off the animal. They saw the dog's bruised muzzle and the blood on his paws, and they assumed he was rabid or panicked by the storm. Cooper ignored the men. He lunged at the control console, his front paws slamming onto the dashboard. He wasn't attacking the pilots, he was attacking the silence. He barked at the dark, snow-choked window, then turned and looked directly into Ivan's eyes. It was a look of such profound, human-like terror that Ivan froze. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of men who knew they were about to die. Sergei grabbed Cooper's collar, trying to drag him back into the corridor. Cooper dug his claws into the floor, growling through his teeth, and then he did something that silenced both men. He lunged for the floor-mounted emergency air brake. This wasn't a button, it was a heavy, red-painted steel lever that required massive force to move. Cooper clamped his jaws onto the handle and threw himself backward, his body shaking with the effort. "He's trying to stop the train!" Sergei yelled, stunned. He moved to pull the dog off the lever, but Ivan shouted for him to stop. Ivan was a veteran of 30 years on the rails, and he had learned to trust the unseen variables of the wilderness. He looked at his screens, everything was still green. He looked at the dog, Cooper was still pulling, his eyes fixed on the red lever with a singular, life-or-death focus. In that split second, Ivan felt it too, a subtle, sickening change in the pitch of the floor beneath his boots. It wasn't on the sensors, but it was there, a wrongness. In the soul of the machine. Ivan shoved Sergei aside and slammed his own hand onto the manual override, adding his weight to Cooper's. "Hold on," he screamed into the radio. He didn't know why he was doing it, but he knew he couldn't ignore the dog's silent alarm any longer. Chapter 5: 6 Inches from Eternity. The world dissolved into a cacophony of violence. When the emergency brakes of a 500-ton train engage at 200 miles per hour, the laws of physics demand a sacrifice. A terrifying shriek tore through the night as the brake pads gripped the wheels with enough force to melt the steel. Inside the cabins, 800 passengers were jolted from their dreams, thrown into walls and floors as the express bucked like a wounded animal. Outside, the darkness was illuminated by a spectacular, horrifying light show. A plume of white-hot sparks, 100 feet long, sprayed into the blizzard as the wheels fought for friction on the icy rails. The sound was like 1,000 thunderclaps happening at once, a grinding, metallic roar that echoed off the mountain peaks. Cooper remained in the cockpit, his paws braced against the console, his eyes never leaving the darkness ahead. The train didn't stop quickly. It slid for over a mile, its massive momentum fighting against the friction. The cars groaned and twisted, the couplings screaming under the tension. Inside the pod, Ivan and Sergei watched the distance marker on their HUD. They were decelerating, but they were still moving at 60, 40, 20 miles per hour. The steel fracture was coming, and they were still sliding toward it. With a final, bone-jarring shudder that felt like the earth itself had cracked, the Trans-Siberian Express came to a dead halt. The silence that followed was heavier than the snow, a thick, suffocating quiet. That made their ears ring. Ivan sat panting, his hands shaking so hard he could barely unbuckle his harness. Cooper let go of the brake lever and sat down on the floor, his chest heaving, his job finally done. Ivan grabbed a high-powered spotlight and stepped out of the cabin door into the freezing night. The beam of light sliced through the falling snow, scanning the tracks ahead. He walked less than 10 paces before he stopped, his legs suddenly turning to water. There, bathed in the white light, was the fracture. The rail had snapped completely, leaving a 3-inch gap of jagged metal. The front wheel of the engine was resting exactly 6 inches away from the void. Chapter 6: The Guardian of the Express. As the sun began to bleed over the Siberian horizon, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, the story of the Golden Guardian began to move through the train. 800 passengers, wrapped in blankets and shivering from the cold, stood on the tracks and looked at the gap in the rail. They realized that if the train had traveled just 1 second longer, they would have been lost in the ravine below. They were alive because of a dog who heard a sound that didn't exist to human ears. The shipping company executives arrived by helicopter, followed quickly by news crews from Moscow and Beijing. They wanted to talk about statistical anomalies and sensor failures, but the engineers only wanted to talk about Cooper. Ivan stood by the dog's side, his hand resting on the golden retriever's head, refusing to let the cameras get too close to the exhausted animal. "The machines told us we were safe," Ivan told the reporters. "But the dog told us the truth." Cooper was eventually taken to a veterinarian in the nearest city, where he was treated for his bruised muzzle and torn claws. He received thousands of letters from the passengers he had saved, and a lifetime service medal from the Ministry of Transport. But Cooper didn't care for the medal or the fame. He was happy just to be back in the warmth of a home, his head resting once again on his paws, listening to the safe, steady heartbeat of the world around him. The Trans-Siberian Express company eventually installed a new type of acoustic sensor on every train in their fleet, a device modeled after the sensitivity of a canine's paw. But the engineers knew that no machine could ever replace the soul of a guardian. They placed a small golden silhouette of a dog on the hull of Engine 704, a permanent reminder of the night the steel fracture met its match. Today, Cooper is a legend in the high country, a symbol of the bond between man and beast. He proved that in our rush toward a high-tech future, we must never forget the ancient instincts that kept us safe for thousands of years. As long as there are guardians like Cooper watching over the dark, the lights of the Express will always find their way home. They don't need a voice to speak the truth. If Cooper's heroic journey touched your heart, join us in honoring his legacy. Asterisk hit the like button to show the world that every animal has a hero inside. Asterisk subscribe to Paws that saved lives so you never miss a story of courage and survival. Asterisk comment Cooper below to leave a tribute for the dog who saved 800 souls.